are also doing note taking as well, which is pretty cool. It's an AI note taking, and it will also give us a summary of our class. So for those that would like to see what Cynthia basically had done in note taking, I'd be happy to probably see and find whatever Cynthia was doing in AI note taking. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. We are still doing our tafsir. Let's look into what we were doing. I know we kind of went past our time. قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. And we basically looked at Tafsir al-Qurtubi. We were still at Tafsir al-Qurtubi for quite a while. And let's see, we did عَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. And we said the word غَوَى, it basically had a number of different meanings, and we basically talked about al-ighwa or al-ghawa to one, basically seduce the heart. In other words, a person getting manipulated internally, and the manipulation is mainly centered around one, arrogance, two, envy. We talked about that first meaning of ghawa. The second meaning for ghawa is to destruct. And we said that is similar to the interpretation فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيَّ. But even with غَيَّ, you had a third meaning for the word غَيْ or غَوَى to actually mean to seduce or to repel away. So 3 different meanings. Number 1 is to manipulate, well, internally, meaning the person's heart is basically shifting away from basically Sirat al-Mustaqim. That's the first meaning. The second meaning to basically mean to destruct. The third meaning is to mean to repel away or to basically be going or to go astray. So that was the first meaning that we talked about. And we went in details with the ayat and the relationship with that. And the other thing we talked about is basically somebody might question, is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that basically tempted Iblis to basically take the wrong direction, or was it that he had taken the wrong direction? And to answer that one, we said there are 2 types of hidayah. We said the first type of hidayah is basically hidayah. Here we go. We said hidayat istidlal and hidayat tawfiq. We said there are 2 types of hidayah. The hidayah in seeing the evidence, in other words, understanding the evidence, finding the evidence, finding the resources to understand the argument or to understand the fact or to understand the aqidah or to understand basically the basis. But knowing the evidence and knowing the details does not necessarily mean that the person is going to stage 2 of finding guidance. Stage 2 basically means hidayat tawfiq, being successful in embracing guidance. So you can find guidance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person fully embraced it in making it as an implementation in their life, as making it an embracement that they carry in identity. So we said that to explain when ولا ينفعكم نصحي إن أردت أن أنصح لكم إن كان الله يريد أن يغويكم هو ربكم وإليه ترجعون. So that basically is to explain that Prophet Nuh alayhi salam is letting them know that, well, there was this position that I was presenting all the different evidences, but you didn't make use of it. You recognized it, but you still had chosen to go for basically rejecting, embracing the truth. And this is extremely important because many times we would see dua, and some people want to do da'wah, and then they continuously think that the person is just needing more evidence. Sometimes it's not a lack of evidence. So sometimes you're not necessarily failing in presenting the evidence. Sometimes it's that the person had chosen to let their arrogance basically be on top, their arrogance basically, lead them to not taking the guidance that they are finding. So it's either sometimes, you want to keep in mind that sometimes the people will choose to repel away for, let's call it hasad reasons. Sometimes it's just they don't want to basically embrace the da'wah because their own ego is basically feeling that, what, I'm not going to accept it from her because then it's going to prove me wrong and her right. But then they would insist because of their ego problem right there. So when you look at Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, وَلَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ نُصْحِي إِنْ أَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَنْصَحَ لَكُمْ. He's basically he had done his da'wah and they had reached a level where they were not benefiting even from the evidences that were presented. They weren't benefiting anymore. So now these evidences that he was presented, they became useless. Not that the evidence was useless. The evidence was worthy of giving them Jannah, of giving them guidance, of giving them success. But it became useless because they were basically choosing to abandon Hidayat al-Tawfiq. They had chosen to abandon Hidayat al-Tawfiq. They had chosen to abandon the opportunity to finding basically guidance. So once they had chosen to abandon this Hidayat al-Tawfiq, then in that situation, him continuing in explaining Hidayat al-Istidlal and giving the different evidences, it becomes just a waste of time. So sometimes it is necessary to have the hikmah and see whether the person is needing time or whether the person is really lacking the resources and that you had to present it, or whether this person is having certain issues of Hidayat al-Tawfiq. Let me explain just a little bit about certain issues of Hidayat al-Tawfiq. When we're speaking about Hidayat al-Tawfiq, is the obstacle. Is the obstacle necessarily a misconception? If it is a misconception, then that's a problem in Hidayat al-Istidlal. They've got a misconception. There's some or there are some questions, or there's a question, there's an issue that is troubling them. They just couldn't, I guess, have the right vision and the right position to understand it wholeheartedly or entirely. And then they became really in this position where they're either skeptic or they're probably confused, and the list goes on, that they did not get to see that dalil or the evidence. Okay, that's one area. Hidayat al-Tawfiq is usually an issue of ego. One, ego, just like an istikbar right there, just like that arrogance, or just like that al-inad, which is an issue of ego. The person, it's either that they're envious of the other person and their charisma, their power, whatever it is, or it's probably just them being stubborn, that they just don't want to listen to what you're saying. It becomes just an issue of self-centricity. Okay, so in that situation, sometimes you have to see what really is causing that ego, what really is causing that arrogance. Is it really just an issue of arrogance? Or maybe I need to be a person that is humble, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, if you were harsh in the way that you were delivering the message, or غليظ القلب, or your heart was hard. In other words, you were dealt with people in a way where you were presenting yourself like you were superior, you were somehow degrading people, then people will just basically just repel away. It is basically it is part of human nature that they are looking for someone that they would feel is close to them. But that is not to put you in a level where you would become, under the name or under the description of humble, make a clown of yourself. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Now, when you're doing da'wah, it's important to see, is there trouble in hidayat al-istidlal, or is there trouble in their hidayat al-tawfiq? This is a key thing, because if their trouble is in hidayat al-tawfiq, it's an issue of, are they struggling with perhaps maybe giving up on alcohol, or giving up on their friends, or giving up on their circles, or giving up on dunya, or what is the struggle? Is it dunya, or is it heart, or is it something else? What is the problem? Where are they confused? Where are they confused in? What is basically keeping them away from that hidayah? So that's what we basically have to do. That diagnose. Let's call it this way. Sometimes you have to diagnose the situation before you give the prescription, and you start thinking, here's my plan. Okay, so even when we do our homework in diagnosing the situation, which is really beautiful, that you would find Sufis many times, the shuyukh, a Sufi sheikh. I'm not talking about deviant Sufi sheikh, but I'm generally speaking about let's call them the Rabbaniyin Sufis. And there are those Rabbaniyin Sufis. Oh yes, there are many great Rabbaniyin Sufis out there. And never mind those that would think just the label Sufi is enough to basically cancel you out. Absolutely not. There are great Sufi shuyukh that really have great religious integrity, that have very outstanding ilm al-tazkiyah, and we definitely need those ulama. Anyhow, so when you find some of those shuyukh that would some of those ulama and some of those shuyukh that would do somewhat of kind of like a diagnostic evaluation, and really see, where is that problem? Is it in hidayat al-tawfiq or hidayat al-istidlal? And if it is in hidayat al-tawfiq, what should be done? How can we get this person to find hidayat al-tawfiq? It could also be Muslim. This isn't just talking about non-Muslims struggling with hidayat al-tawfiq. It could also be a Muslim as well, where they're probably struggling with being committed to their salah, or being committed to their hijab, or being committed to their siyam, or being committed to their zakat, or being committed to coming to the masjid, or whatever it is. What is the problem? And some of the shuyukh and tazkiyah, they would be experts in hidayat al-tawfiq. They might actually prescribe things like not to speak other than for a certain amount of time. Like, let's say all the amount of things that I want you to say should not exceed let's say 25 minutes or an hour per day, or 2 hours, or whatever it is. Or I want you to use this amount of time, let's say on your phone. How much time are you using your phone for? And then probably help you gradually get into hidayat tawfiq. Yet one thing I will say is that sometimes, especially during our day and age, where the society had made, if a guru were to probably prescribe maybe harsh movements, or harsh somersaults, or whatever it is, or a harsh lifestyle, it to be, spiritual, as in a Buddhist culture, or probably a shaman, or whatever it is, they'll take it just fine. But if a Muslim scholar or a Muslim sheikh were to say, I want you to fast these many days, I want you to isolate these groups, or I want you to probably, live in somewhat of, let's call it, a training that is helping that Muslim brother or sister basically find their ways to hidayat al-tawfiq, it was usually perceived as you had just repelled them away from the deen. We're so fast in criticizing our shuyukh, so fast in criticizing the methods, so fast in criticizing the scholars, especially Muslim scholars, so fast And unfortunately, even the Muslims, they are basically the first to always underestimate the ulama, and there are a number of different reasons to it. Number one is certainly media, to present Muslims and to present Muslim scholars that they are basically traditional, backward, and uneducated, and so forth. And unfortunately, in a society where the Muslims themselves are basically under this type of brainwashing, you would see the Muslims are the first to underestimate, to give lack of respect to their own scholars. So just keep that one in mind. And that's a very dangerous thing, because when you look at the kutub talab al-ilm, all the kutub and all the books that relate to talab al-ilm, the first thing they would say is adab talab al-ilm. Before you even get to ilm, there's one thing, adab talab al-ilm. Because if you do not honor that scholar, or you do not honor that alim right there, then you don't honor the ilm that they have, and therefore whatever prescription that they might give you, you're just going to throw it in the garbage. You're just going to throw it because to you, this person is not in a place of respect. And certainly, when you go to any treatment, when you go to any treatment, whether that was physical treatment, medical treatment, whatever treatment, not until you honor and you appreciate and you feel that that person is competent are you really going to embrace their prescription. So that's why when we talk about hidayat al-tawfiq, the ulama in tazkiyah may prescribe certain things like 1,000 times of sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, or 1,000 times of istighfar, or probably reading certain adhkar, etc., and taking those as basically helping you in hidayat al-tawfiq is something that our society is missing. Something our society is missing. Another thing, hidayat al-tawfiq, can, or a method that can help in hidayat al-tawfiq is basically a group of supporters. So a group of supporters may be attending this masjid, and this masjid, they'll create a circle. And I would like to say that attending the masjid and making a circle of friends at the masjid, I know very well that not often will you necessarily find the best circle of friends at the masjid. And I do recognize that, many times they too are struggling. Okay, they too are struggling. And many times we would be too harsh in our criticism, thinking that, I went to the masjid and I felt unmosqued. They didn't welcome me. They didn't meet. They're all feeling that they are having that struggle to come to the masjid themselves. All right, you are part of this masjid, and you are part of the responsibility to make everyone feel that they are part of it. So don't necessarily think that they are supposed to be somehow, that the masjid belongs to them and that you are right there a guest. The masjid belongs to all of us, and we all need to embrace ourselves. We all are looking for a place of support to help us grow in our deen. That's one thing I would recommend. Going to the masjid gives you that support, and going to the masjid keeps you basically with this group that is, hey, today we have a halaqah. Where were you? We're waiting for you. Or probably, and probably, just making such group of friends that will be there whenever one is struggling with certain things, or probably having some issues, that they'll be there to probably just a few meals, or probably help around cleaning her house, or probably just asking, hey, are you struggling with your bills? Do you need anything? And that in itself is that part of what will take away all the different emotions that can be an obstacle, especially in the women's world. It can be an obstacle from the sisters basically finding a circle of iman. So hidayat al-tawfiq, we definitely need that humility. We definitely need to be humble. and learn more. And we also need to be humble with the Muslim brothers and sisters. So having that hidayah is extremely important. And hidayah al-tawfiq, of course, with a lot of these mawa'adh. Earlier we're talking about motivational speakers. Certainly, in fact, maybe 90% of the motivational speakers, they do not necessarily have the ilm, but we still need them. We still need them because they have the skill to reach out to the masses. They have the skill. Not everybody has the skill to reach out to the masses. Not everyone is capable of reaching out and knocking on people's hearts. It's sometimes needing those experts in hidayat al-tawfiq. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give support to those many sisters and many brothers that are working on Hidayat al-Tawfiq and helping others find Hidayat al-Tawfiq, and which certainly we may call them motivational speakers, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, increase the numbers of those brothers and sisters that are working on Hidayat al-Tawfiq and also working on Hidayat al-Istidlal. Hidayat al-Istidlal requires a different level of competence, a different level of qualification, because Hidayat al-Istidlal, it basically works on learning the resources, understanding the misconceptions, how to respond to the misconceptions, etc. So it's a different level of expertise. Hidayat al-Tawfiq requires more working on ground, face to face, and being with the people. Hidayat al-Istidlal, you're more working, let's call it behind the scenes. You're more working probably, on your computer, or probably in the library, or behind the books, or probably when you're talking about Hidayat al-Istidlal, you're going to have less audience in Hidayat al-Istidlal. Just keep that one in mind. Why? Less audience, because in Hidayat al-Istidlal, you're basically working on Aqidah, you're working on the Adillah, you're working on the resources, basically. And most people are not necessarily looking for Istidlal as much as they're basically just living their life and not necessarily thinking about all the questions out there. Most people in Hidayat al-Tawfiq, that's mainly where the audience is. So that's why we need, on all ends, basically dua to work on all ends, Hidayat al-Istidlal and Hidayat al-Tawfiq. So now we go further, and we talked about لَأَقْعُدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, and we said لَأَقْعُدَنَّ actually means to be basically a challenge, to bring obstruction, to basically deter people away, basically from finding the right path, and certainly by making wronghood appear like it is the place of success, or appear like it is the place that will give them happiness, absolute happiness, temporary happiness, whatever it is, and joy, and etc. And then it becomes something that certainly will be one done through waswasa, or done through basically the people that will do waswasa. We'll talk about waswasa in just a bit, inshallah. As-Sirat al-Mustaqim. So what is as-Sirat al-Mustaqim? We said it is either one, the path to Jannah, whether we're speaking about literally the path to Jannah, meaning the bridge right in between Jannah and hellfire, or whether we're speaking about metaphorically anything that leads to Jannah in the hereafter. So we're talking about honesty, we're talking about all the different things, prayer, fasting, all these different things that basically lead to Jannah. The other thing is that ثُمَّ لَآتِيَنَّهُم مِّن بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ. We basically talked about this one. Is this literally standing in front of you, behind you, on your right and on your left, or is this talking about that? No, بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ is basically talking about this dunya, their future in this dunya, and or min khalfihim, basically the hereafter. It doesn't necessarily mean min khalfihim, to mean behind them, but according to this interpretation, basically min khalfihim is to mean the farther end of the path. So min khalfihim, although literally it means behind them, but in Lughah Arabiya, sometimes the word is actually the interpretation or the translation of it, the interpretation is the opposite of it. So وَكَانَ وَرَاءَهُم مَلِكٌ يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ سَفِينَةٍ غَصْبًا. This isn't talking about a malik that was behind them, but this is talking about وراءهم to mean in front of them. So in Lugha Arabiya, sometimes a word is actually interpreted or defined based on the opposite. So in this situation, the idiom is min khalfihim to mean in the far future. We're speaking about the akhirah according to one interpretation. So how does shaitan actually come to the people, basically promising them dunya, promising them success in this life, and making them basically doubt akhirah? Why is this an important thing? Making them doubt akhirah. All right, so now we look at some of the things, aymanihim, to basically mean their own good deeds, whether they wanted to pray, but then told them, you know what, your prayer is not going to be accepted because you're probably doing it for the sake of people. You're probably doing it for the sake of impressing people and so forth. And then the person decides, yeah, maybe I am, and then leaves their salah. That is a problem. All right, that's shaitan basically coming to them عن أيمانهم عن شمائلهم. Basically, they would come and the shaitan would come basically when the person is probably attempting to do wronghood, and they'll continue. It's going to feel good. You're going to like it. These are fun to be around, and etc. And when in reality, it's nothing but basically seducing the person. All right. قال اخرج منها مذءوما مدحورا لمن تبعك منهم لأملأن جهنم منكم. And what? And لأملأن جهنم منكم. And let's see. منكم أجمعين. قال اخرج منها. What does أخرج منها mean? Actually, which minha is referring, the word, the pronoun minha, what is it referring to? It's referring to Jannah. Is it referring to Jannah, or is it referring to the land that they were in? So we did talk about this. We said two different opinions. The first one was, no, this was talking about the actual Jannah that we would know that is a reward for the good deeds. And another opinion basically said, well, then no, this is talking about a land that basically was the land that Prophet Adam alayhi salam was put to dwell in. So in other words, it's on earth. He was supposed to be there dwelling on earth. And then on this land on earth, he was basically warned not to eat from the tree, and not yet was shaitan necessarily repelled away in the same way. But at the end, shaitan, basically after seducing Adam, that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala قال اخرج منها, whether we're talking about Jannah here or whether we're speaking about the land that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had asked everyone to basically prostrate to Adam in. Okay, مذءوما مدحورا. مذءوما basically means to displeased. The word is ذمم. That's the root. ذمم, to basically mean to speak wrongly of someone or be displeased of someone. Okay. That's مذءوما. And one thing is that there were a number of different qira'at. Why is it important to learn about the qira'at? Because the qira'at give us another extra meaning. Sometimes give us an extra meaning, and sometimes give us an extra explanation, like think of it as a commentary. So when you look at Al-A'mash, he read it as madhuman, even though, like you see, Al-Qurtubi basically said, well, the meaning is really one, but that's more of a way to vocalize it, madhuman, but not necessarily affecting the meaning. Let's see another meaning. Al-madhum al-manfi. Al-manfi, to be evicted, the exiled one. Okay, and he said that the meanings, whether we're speaking about manfi to mean exiled, or whether we're speaking about madhuman, or a person that is madhuman, a person that is basically that is in a place of not respect. Okay, in a place of disrespect, in a place of dishonor, in a place where everyone basically sees him as the evil one and not the one that people would want to embrace. All right. والمدحور المبعد المطرود. What is المبعد? المبعد is the exiled one. So what's the difference between then مذءوم or مذوم and مدحور? So المذءوم is basically the one that people are displeased with or displeased with. Okay. المدحور is the exiled one. Okay, that's it. And certainly, like you could see, well, Mujahid had a different opinion. Mujahid also said that mad'um, he considered that it also means exiled as well. And so then exiled and exiled? No, because il-madhur is the one that is evicted, but in a way that is to bring about humiliation. So he wasn't just evicted, but no, he was evicted in a way to represent basically humiliation to that person. لمن تبعك منهم لأملأن جهنم منكم أجمعين. So what is this? Of course, if you want to say this one, you got to speak about the lam right there. لمن and لأملأن. So لمن تبعك. So when you look at this, this is called لام القسم. لام القسم meaning the oath lam right there. And therefore, whenever you would have the oath lam, well, what does it mean that there's an oath lam? What does that even mean? What does it mean to have an oath lam? So when in Lugha Arabiya, when you make an oath, well, not just in Lugha Arabiya, but in other languages as well, when you make an oath, it's to show affirmation. It's to show determination. It is to show that you will not change that whatsoever. And it becomes, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it basically becomes an act or a word of promise that we would know that is a fact and will take place and will happen. So do we understand the same from Iblis when he basically said, لَآتِيَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ, I will come to them. All right. Do we understand it? The same thing with that lamb right there. No, we would understand it that that's his determination. Not that it's necessarily going to be a fact that will happen. All right. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything is in his hands. Everything. And that's why he knew, even though he said, لَآتِيَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ وَعَنْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ وَعَنْ شَمَائِلِهِمْ. But he knew that إِلَّا عِبَادِكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. I have no control over those that are living in the complete sincerity. So even Iblis recognized that his power and his influence is limited. His power and influence is limited. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, when he makes that oath, is unlimited, and it basically is to express sometimes affirmation, sometimes il-qasam is to express the seriousness of the how serious something is, just like when you say wal fajr. What does this wal fajr actually mean? Wal asr, wal duha, wal layli idha yaghsha. So that would be an oath. That oath is to basically express either the seriousness or the magnitude of something, or is to express the affirmation of something, or is to express the al-azama, the magnificence of something. And if the Lord Almighty is making an oath of something, that is to basically let us know that this is a very, very critical matter. This is a key thing. Okay, let's see. لَمَنْ تَبِعَكَ مِنْهُمْ لَأَمْلَأَنَّ جَهَنَّمَ مِنْكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Okay, I'm just trying to get to right there. Okay, the other qira'ah that of course, رواية أبي بكر ibn Ayyash, لمن, with the kasra on the lam, لمن تبعك منهم. And let's see, لمن تبعك منهم. And what's the difference? So تقديره, for the reason, and not necessarily a confirmation, but saying, well, for the reason of whoever would follow me. So what does it mean for the reason? So what it means is that, let's see right there. So you're talking about لمن تبعك منهم, or لمن تبعك منهم. So this قراءة is لمن. That's the way it Hafs, okay? In majority, actually. And لمن تبعك منهم, and that is to be basically an informative clause and saying, for whoever is following you and whoever embraces you, then in that situation, for them, that's liman. Liman is for them. Okay? Liman, whoever then follows you, I will basically fill hellfire with them all. Whoever follows you. Okay, let's continue right there. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. ويا آدم اسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة فكلا من حيث شئتما ولا تقربا هذه الشجرة. يا آدم اسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة. O Adam, you and your spouse dwell in Jannah. When you look at the word uskun, we made it clear. We said uskun can mean to not have any ittirab, any type of trembling, not to have any type of trembling. In other words, it's in a state of tranquility, in a state of peace, in a state of calmness. That's basically a sukoon. That's a sukoon, right? That's a sukoon. قال لآدم بعد إخراج إبليس من موضعه من السماء. When was he basically told that? After Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taken him out of Jannah. And he basically said, Uskun anta wa Hawa'ul Jannah. You and Hawa dwell in Jannah. We talked about that before, so I'm not going to go into this one. فوسوس لهما الشيطان ليبدي لهما ما وري. Let's look at the word waswasa. And what does that even look like? When you say waswasa, what does that look like? Waswasa actually means that when you look at lahuma, to both of them. One thing I had seen that in التحرير والتنوير, I was actually reading over التحرير والتنوير for الطاهر ibn Ashur. He said a very, I guess it's different from what he had said. He said what you would see in the context of these ayat is that they basically were hesitant to accept what he said. That they didn't necessarily accept what Shaitan said right away, which is why the ayah says waswasa. So let me explain the word waswasa. In Lugha Arabiya, the words that have repetition, waswasa, dahraja, taqtaqa, etc. These words that have repeated consonants or repeated words, number one, it basically means that there's a repetition. And it can mean there's a consistency. It can also mean that, depending on the word, like waswasa, taqtaqa, dahraja, sometimes some of these words can be an onomatopoeia. So just like when you say the word like meow, for example, okay? The cat, that's not what really the cat is saying. It's just the sound of it. You're trying to mimic it. And that's the same thing. When you're saying waswasa, you're trying to mimic. So that was the first meaning, is that this is an onomatopoeia, and you're there, that it was mimicking the sound of what Shaitan would do. Waswasa. And you could see waswasa one, waswasa. Number one, you could see that there's a repetition, there's a consistency. And number three is that you could say that it is, if we were to say that it's an onomatopoeia, that it is the sound of whisper. Waswasa. It's a sound of whisper. How did we get to the sound of whisper from the word waswasa? Because the letter wa You could say it's a weak letter in the sin as well, so that's why it's huruf al-hams right there. So you're saying that it's a silent way of communicating with Adam, silent way of what the shaitan will basically not only communicate with Adam, what will communicate with the people in a way that sounds like a whisper. It is very subtle that you could sometimes not even recognize that it's there. The person around you, you could have a shaitan basically giving you waswas. You wouldn't even recognize the person's undergoing waswas. So you would basically be there and not even recognize that the other person's facing waswas. So why? Because it's very subtle. It's very hidden. It is very silent that you would not even recognize it. That's why it's called waswasa. And plus, what Tahir ibn Ashur was saying is that it was repetitive, it was consistent, because the word waswasa is giving us that indication. All right, so that's one thing Tahir ibn Ashur said that al-Qurtubi didn't say. Qurtubi didn't even mention that there was any consistency. Well, perhaps maybe he said that in Surah Taha. He did say that, but at least not here. Even though this is the first time, at least from Surah Al-Baqarah till here, this is the first time that we come across the word waswasa. I do not remember. I do not remember in any other place, not in the Quran, because we know in Surah Al-Nas, but at least in any other place that Al-Qurtubi commented on the word waswasa. So when did this waswasa actually happen? Well, it happened while he was still in Jannah. And what was this waswas looking like? That he appeared to him in a form of a sapien or as a form of a snake or anything of that sort. There's really no evidence that he came in a form of a snake. Okay. I know that that's basically in, the Old Testament, that he came in a snake and basically told him that. All right. Was there a snake that was involved? Or was it in his own shape? Or was it in a shape of a different animal? We don't actually know. At the end of the day, is that he basically had come in a way that was basically communicating to both of them. Were they capable of seeing Iblis basically in the shape that he really is in, or what was it like? Well, at least we know that he was capable of communicating to both Adam and Hawa. And of course, in the Muslim in the Muslim resources, it was not that the sapien or whatever that serpent, not sapien, but serpent. He wasn't necessarily coming to Hawa, but the serpent was actually coming to both. That snake, the serpent, was actually coming to both and not to one, meaning coming to Hawa in a different way and coming to Adam in a different way. And that serpent basically was trying to communicate in different ways to get them out of basically al-haqq. All right. So what is الوسوسة in itself? So in Lugha Arabiya, الوسوسة is basically a hidden voice, a hidden way of communicating. And الوسوسة, another meaning for it is حديث النفس. So what is حديث النفس? حديث النفس would be just the communication that one does with himself or herself. And when you say waswasa, it could also be wiswas. Waswas and wiswas. So basically with a fatha and or a kasra. Wiswas and waswas. Il-waswas is basically to mean the noun of it. And il-wiswas is, well, I mean, you have different scholars actually have different interpretations for il-wiswas. At the end is that waswas is also a name of shaitan. So that's why the ayah says, min sharril waswas. Sharril waswas, this is right there, of course. Sharril waswas, the evils, or at least the evil of il waswas, is basically, it's one of the names of shayateen. And what are they going to do? لِيُبْدِيَ لَهُمَا. In other words, to basically show them of what was covered. And what else? What was he doing? لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًّا وَحَزَنًا. So Shaitan was there basically to do one thing. In other words, was it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him to do this purpose, or was Shaitan acting in his own purpose, his own service? What are the things that Shaitan would want to attempt to get us into? Number one is to uncover our awrah. What does that have to do with anything? The more you uncover of awrah, the higher the chances of deviation, the impact it has on what you and how you relate with your spirituality, how you relate with ethics. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that the first thing that dropped when Adam was seduced was actually the sitr, the covering. And certainly, the less covering, the more deviant people are. The less covering, the more deviant people are. What is that supposed to mean? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that the first thing after Shaitan had seduced them was basically the uncovering of their awrah. That was the first thing. That was the first implication. In other words, one of the first things that you will see in a deviant society is the prevalence of people uncovering. Whenever you see people uncovering more, know that behind this uncovering or the lack of modesty is further and further corruption within the society. Just know it right on the spot. The more aura appearing, the farther this person is, or these group of people are basically distant away from akhlaq, from manners. What is the other thing that Shaitan wanted to do? لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًّا وَحَزَنًا. To be their enemy, and also to bring them sadness and sorrow, or in today's terminology, depression, mental illness, all of these different things. Does that mean every single mental illness and every single depression is basically coming from Shaitan? No, some of it is probably coming from chemical imbalance, maybe who knows what is lacking and whatever, all of that stuff. Okay, that's one way. But that doesn't mean every single person that is struggling with some kind of a mental illness that they're necessarily having waswasa. Nope, sometimes it can be chemical imbalance, exactly like you would have basically as an illness on the person's health. All right, so therefore, when we're speaking about لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًّا وَحَزَنًا, that Shaitan basically wanted to be the enemy and also bring in sorrow and sadness. So when you say سَوْآتِهِمَا, what is a سَوْآ? Sawa is anything that you are shy of it appearing. Sawa could also mean the private parts. So what is wuriya then? This is ma wuriya, to what ليبدي لهم ما وري عنهما من سوآتهما. ليبدي, to uncover what was basically what was revealing, and revealing what was supposed to be covered, basically from their private parts. Okay, what is Sawa? Sawa is basically the private part. And certainly it is, why is it called Sawa anyways? Where does the word come from? The word comes from Sa'a, now, which means to harm, and Sa'a could also mean to harm internally, to feel, not comfortable. Okay, that could also be another meaning. So Sawa is anything that you feel that you're uncomfortable with other people seeing it. All right, and certainly that's the private part. Not comfortable, it is part of your instinct that you want to cover it. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it as part of your instinct to cover it. And certainly by covering it, you would basically maintain that honor. So why and how did he manage to basically convince them? So he said, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ مَلَكَيْنِ. Is it مَلْكَيْنِ, مَلِكَيْنِ, or مَلَكَيْنِ? All these three different qira'at are there. مَلْكَيْنِ, مَلِكَيْنِ, and مَلَكَيْنِ. What is the difference? مَلَكَيْنِ is two angels. Malkaini is basically to have ownership. Milkaini is to basically, Malikaini, sorry, Malikaini, not Milkaini, but Malikaini is two kings. So Malakaini, Malkaini, and Malikaini, with that lam having a kasra. Malikaini is two kings. So what is the promise anyways that he was promising them? The first one in Malakaini, that Shaitan basically said, if you were to eat from that tree, that you will basically be at the level of Malaika. Why? Because it basically has the secret to eternity. And then you would become like an angel. Angels don't die. They don't die. So, and plus, they're basically beautiful, etc. So it's probably what's going to give you that opportunity to be like a beautiful angel living internally. And that was the first interpretation. The second interpretation is malikaini, to be kings. If you own everything, then you're the king of the place. You're in full authority of the place. Malkaini also comes from that authority. So to say, well, you will basically be owning everything, including that tree, then there's no exception to your ownership. And all these different opinions, they're basically there. And certainly, inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. As for now, subhanakallah wa bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. We'll continue speaking about فَوَسْوَسَ لَهُمَا الشَّيْطَانُ, inshallah, with this ayah, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ مَلَكَيْنِ أو مَلِكَيْنِ or مَلِكَيْنِ أو تَكُونَ مِنَ الْخَالِدِينَ. Inshallah, we will continue from here. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. All right. So